Good day. I am Lionel Sanchez, and in this lecture, which is Module 2 Building and Managing a Design Practice, will mark a transition in how we think about design. So, until now, much of your training has been focused on form, a lot of the material, aesthetics, and the systems of production and design. So today we would like to examine something more foundational, also that is needed in design, and which is the design practice itself. Because the reality is that design does not fail because usually the designer has weak ideas or lacks creativity, but oftentimes it is because it fails because of the weak systems in place in order to support the business venture for design. Design is both creative practice, and it is also almost always an economic activity. And many talented designers, they struggle professionally, not because they lack the skill in designing, but because they also lack the structure to reinforce their design business. And there is a critical difference between designing objects and running a design practice. Objects do not just exist in a vacuum. We have to remember that practice also exists in forms of contracts, timelines, the liabilities, and the financial commitments of a designer. So let us begin with this very important key question. Perhaps what does it mean to be a professionally accountable as a designer? Because accountability means you are responsible not only for what you create in your design business, but for how it is delivered, how design is being documented, how it is priced, and how it is sustained in the long run. So there are four common professional trajectories as we discussed in the last module. You have a freelance designer, you have an independent studio, and then you have the in-house corporate designer, and you can also have a hybrid model. Sometimes the designer becomes an entrepreneur. Um, and then we also discussed a designer as an academician or a researcher. And each of these trajectories, they represent a different balance in terms of your autonomy, of your time, the risk, the stability, the growth, and at the same time, the liability that you have when you venture into these three or four trajectories. Like, for example, freelancing gives you a lot of autonomy, but somehow gives you quite limited protection. But at the same time, a studio allows you to scale, but it also demands structure because in this setup, you're going to already be employing people in-house as an in-house corporate designer. It also means it offers stability because you have a fixed salary, but of course you have less autonomy and less control of your time and perhaps your design decisions. And then we also have like the hybrid model. You have either consultancy, teaching. These hybrid models diversify risk, but also increase the complexity, especially in terms of your schedule. So currently, as an example, in my case, no, I have a hybrid model. being an independent studio designer and someone who is teaching design. So if you were forced to choose today, um, excuse me, not emotionally but strategically, which of these pathways you are going to choose, which I would like to ask you which model fits your tolerance for risk, because ultimately that is what you will be answering, the amount of risk you are willing to take, whatever path that you are going to choose. And so the moment that you accept payment for design, you already become a legal actor in uh, the, the design venture, because in the payment you enter into a binding contract, and you already engage with tax systems, and at the same time you assume your liabilities. So there is really no creative exemption to this. Also, the personality determines who is responsible, who can be sued in this agreement or in this contract, who pays the taxes, and then at the same time who absorbs the risks the moment you enter into a contract, say for example through a payment. So you need to remember that the professional maturity begins when you recognize that design operates within the constraints of local laws in the Philippines. So, forms of business organization. Your choice of organization when you put up a design business is not about the prestige that you would want, um, because it is about the responsibility you are willing to take. Say, for example, if you want to put up a sole proprietorship, it means you are the business, and then your assets are also being exposed. And in the case of partnerships, it means you and your partner share the risks and the shared conflicts as well. But when you create a corporation, it creates a separate legal personality, and it allows you to scale, but demands a lot of compliance, especially in terms of paperwork. So you need to ask yourself, if you will be putting up a design venture in the future, how much responsibility are you prepared to carry? Is it a sole proprietorship type of business, a partnership, or a corporation? Also, take note the corporation does not have to comprise five, at least five. It used to be that when you are registered in the Securities Exchange Commission, you're required to have five incorporators. A recent setup of SEC, or Securities Exchange Corporation, is that they already allow uh, one person corporation, or OPCs. That means one person can allow put up a corporation, but it is not sole proprietorship in a sense that the OPC, or one person corporation, is considered a juridical person. So let us now analyze this structurally. Perhaps freelancers offers total control but minimal protection, especially for your assets. Being an in-house also designer offers high protection, granting that you have a fixed salary, and perhaps also considering the benefits that you will be receiving, but you are constrained in terms of your economy sorry constrained in terms of your autonomy, especially of your time and design decisions. And then a studio perhaps balances shared control with shared overhead, because the setup is more intimate and quite smaller compared to that of an in-house corporate designer. We learned in the last module that none of these are morally superior. There's no right path. As soon as you become and graduate, as soon as you want to become a designer, we just have to realize that there are trade-offs between freedom and structure, and ultimately it will be up to you to decide which pathway you are going to take. But remember that professional wisdom lies in understanding these trade-offs before committing to them. Business registration ecosystem. Registration is not bureaucracy, it is infrastructure design, because in the Philippine context, this sequence matters. First, you have to have your name cleared as a design business, of course, making sure that you don't have a duplicate in terms of name and identity. And then you also have to comply with Department of Trade and Industry or Securities and Exchange registration. So usually for sole proprietorship, it's of course through DTI, and for corporations and partnerships and even one person corporation, it's also of course through the Securities and Exchange Commission. And then BRR compliance for taxes, and you're also required to do your local mayor's permit, be it in a municipality or a city. And then benefits, of course, like SSS, PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig compliance. So you need to make sure, say, for example, if you are hiring regular employees, you give the proper benefits according to law. And if you are going through the route of sole proprietorship, then you also have to consider and make it your responsibility to apply it for your own. So you need to remember that skipping one of these steps will somehow create instability and perhaps trouble in the future. Like, for example, if you will not offer benefits, the mandated benefits like SSS, Philip, and Pag-ibig to your future employees, then you might encounter some problems later on. And you need to remember that registering your business makes your business more legitimate, and somehow it will define your capacity to grow as a designer. Registering a design business, so let us just be practical. DTI or SEC registration establishes your identity as a design venture. The barangay clearance also ensures your zoning compliance. If you really want to put up a physical office, and then the mayor's permit allows you to operate your business. You have the LGU business permit, sanitary and fire safety for your office. And then BIR registration establishes your tax accountability and the authority to print receipts. Also enables you to have more legitimate transactions, especially if you have big corporate clients that require you to furnish an official receipt. So each step along the way formalizes your professional existence as a design venture, and you are also designing your business system at this very stage. Operations in design venture are also somewhat considered invisible design systems, but they create creative output from all the chaos. Like, for example, the schedule that you have. This creates a protective layer for your design business. Because remember that without operational clarity in your design, even the very best design can collapse, especially when you are going to deliver. Um, Also, documentation is not necessarily bureaucracy. It is a means of protecting your own design venture. So you need to ask yourself how many design problems are actually operational problems in disguise, and sort of like which design problems you've encountered were actually operational problems, in disguise. So try to think about it. So these are considered the core operational systems when putting up a design venture. So I'd like to identify five major areas. Number one, client onboarding. That's very important. Trying to come up with your leads, because ultimately that will be the very source of your income, the clients. And then you have documentation and contracts, like, for example, the design brief that the client will give, the scope of work, and the agreement that you have between you and your client. And then, thirdly, the way you design your workflow, how your internal uh, processes, the revisions that you allow. Your client, and the approval. And then fourthly, you have the quotation and billing, like, for example, the estimates, the invoicing schedules, and then collections, how you are able to collect, especially if the payment is staggered, or you have a payment scheme in terms of the deliverable of your design, especially if you have a design phases in terms of your deliveries. And then fifthly, you have the project closeout. Soon as you deliver your final um, what is due, the due work that is due for the client, and then how you are able to hand over the assets to the client. And of course, very important that you archive the project, especially for your portfolio. So these are the five key operational systems required in putting up a design business or venture. So contracts must match the scope and the risk that you are willing to take, and at the same time, the scope of work that you agreed with the client, and make sure that you tailor fit the contract to the design brief, because sometimes when you have a generic template, it will fail, especially that each project is different for design. And sometimes milestones and approvals prevent the scope creep. And then you need to also put into the clauses in the contract the revision limits, because it can also protect your time, how many times the client is allowed to revise the design. And then another important thing, which we'll be discussing in the next module, is that intellectual property also must be explicitly defined in your contract. That is very important. And then also look into things that are unclear in your contract, because sometimes if you have something that is vague, it can become a point of contention in the future, or a point of conflict in the future. So make sure that you review your contacts properly, and be as much specific as possible, like, for example, in terms of the schedule, the time frame, the payment schemes, and all the necessary and pertinent details. Because ultimately, being very professional also is a uh, somehow a proof, that you are also reliable as a designer. Okay, so we also know that designers manage relationships as much as they also manage objects. When a client comes in, they bring in their expectations, and sometimes also the suppliers will have their constraints in terms of the delivery. You will encounter these problems soon. The supplier promises a certain timeline, and then they fail to keep up to their promise. And then also in terms of the fabricators, you can also encounter problems in terms of their feasibility. So your role really is to expand, not just to be the creator, but at the same time to also be the coordinator. So you have to shift your or rather expand, not shift but expand your mindset, that you are not simply the creator, but you are also the coordinator of the project. And somehow professional maturity is shown not when you are in complete and full, but not when you are really a control freak, but usually professional maturity is shown when you are very clear and intentional in terms of how you communicate, not just your design, but your professional ethics. So always also keep in mind that if you encounter problems in the future, blaming will solve nothing. So these systems will hopefully prevent um, repeating, when you have systems in place. Okay, so scope, timeline, budget, and quality. This is what is the iron triangle. Plus, you have the accountability. We also learned in the last module that project management is disciplined creativity, actually. And project management does not necessarily suppress your ideas, but somehow a good project management ensures that ideas can be produced within various constraints, like time or budget, when you have these types of constraints. Okay, so production risks include, for example, material lead times. That can be a risk if the lead time for the procurement of the material is not what you would want it to be. Client decision delays, like when the client is unable to make a decision for the project that is necessary to have a timely schedule. And then you also have fabrication bottlenecks with your supplier. If the supplier also is handling a lot of clients, and the dependencies, between these different phases. And so, very important to remember that risk management means also that you identify, you prioritize, and that you are able to mitigate and navigate through these problems. For example, when the fabrication is delayed, but the deadlines usually remain, the client deadlines usually remain. So, also important to keep in mind not to panic, but rather you are able to communicate and structure your adjustments. So sometimes the technique is that soon as you encounter a problem, you communicate it immediately to the client, because they will also appreciate it, rather than them not knowing at all. So you being able to communicate the, like for example, the delays that you encounter, will somehow speak that you are a professional, know that you inform your client promptly. Okay, so why must designers understand money? Because to understand the difference between cash flow and profit enables you to keep your cash flow alive and well. Also, it's important to note that having more profit as a designer allows you for growth, opens up perhaps more opportunities when you have a high profit. And at the same time, you also need to remember that underpricing is a systemic problem and is sometimes driven by a fear or you trying to question your value as a designer and becoming confused. So sometimes that is a problem uh, that most designers face, no? That they question their value and the work that they put into. So also important to keep in mind that having unsustainable pricing is also at the same time unethical, because if your studio cannot survive, your impact or the way you deliver your design will also be affected. Okay, so before you launch your design studio, you must ask these questions. No, so for example, what are your startup costs? How much capital are you willing to put into uh, in starting your design studio? What are your fixed expenses? Like for example, rent. If you are putting up your design studio, of course, electricity, and that is one fixed expense. And then what is your break even point? Then you also need to understand, know how much is your break even point. And so from there, you are able to identify how much profit you would want to make. Okay, so build your financial model before you build your own design studio. So this is the wisest way. Um, to set it up, know that you have a financial model first before you really set up your design studio. uh, Making your design studio visible is really not being vain as a designer, because you need to, of course, you need to communicate your design venture well, and you need to strategize how you're able to communicate uh, and market your design venture. And you also need to look into how your portfolio plays an important part in your design venture, and that your portfolio is not just simply a gallery of all the pictures that you have done, but it is supposedly like your narrative argument, no, your position as a designer, how uh, you take agency in this world, how you are different from the rest, and what makes you as a designer valuable. Because when you are credible, then somehow it will also shape the opportunities that you would be want to rather receive. Okay, so try as much as possible to establish your niche, because ultimately you cannot address all the different market profiles. So you need to establish what makes you really different from the rest of the designers, and it's really important to know that strength, and so that strength you are able to develop. Okay. Also important to note that design does not really grow in isolation, uh, and we've learned that one in the last module, because in the Philippines, most especially, we have institutions, we have guilds, we have agencies that provide access, that provide legitimacy to your design venture in the future, that you are able to learn, that you can perhaps get funding for your design venture. And also through these institutions and your networks, you are able to create visibility. And through these networks, it will amplify your impact beyond all the individual projects that you have. Being a team leader as a designer is not being necessarily being always in authority. Being a leader means clarity. So you must establish a culture where ideas can thrive, but at the same time, ideas can also be challenged safely, because ultimately, conflict in the future will be inevitable, or this will be all unavoidable. And so the goal really is to make it generative, and not to make these conflicts destructive. Also, you will need to understand that professional maturity is shown in being able to communicate clearly. Okay, so you need to, if ever you encounter these difficulties, you need to distinguish creative conflict from personal conflict. You have to be as much as possible to keep it about the work, and then you use structured feedback, and you're also able to review all the constraints that you are facing together. And at the same time, it is also important to document decisions immediately, to reflect the compromise that you are willing to agree upon, because all of these conflicts will become just a learning loop when they are being handled correctly. Okay, so if you think about perfectionism all the time, it will ultimately delay feedback, because there's no such thing as a perfect, of course, but um, agile thinking encourages early prototypes, and somehow, just like in your thesis, so you will be prototyping and be making different iterations. Agile thinking enables you to encourage prototypes and short loops, and at the same time, it will create an environment for continuous improvement, treating the practice itself like sort of like a prototype as well, no? Because today we have to remember that a design operates in uncertainty, as uh, so that is why design is paradoxically there. And then adaptability also, as a person, being able to adapt, being able to be flexible, is also a competitive advantage when you are a designer. So being flexible and being adaptive um, actually is advantage. So now let's try to integrate everything that we have learned. So choose a legal form aligned with your risk tolerance as a designer. Whatever pathway and trajectory you choose, freelance studio, in-house corporate designer, hybrid model, or in teaching, also with teaching or on being an entrepreneur, and the structure that will define your operational system. You are going to a sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, no, or a one-person corporation, and then you also need to determine your leadership style, how you are able to foster culture, trust, and accountability in your practice and within your networks. So I want you to design your practice later on, no, intentionally to design your practice. Be intentional about it. Plan as much as possible. Um, and so you are advised, no, as a young designer, specifically young, who perhaps here in Cebu, if you would like to contextualize it, being a young Cebuano-based industrial designer, your stack practice, no, is already starting. No, try not to think of your practice as already starting right now. Okay, and so if you could give one piece of advice to yourself, then what would it be? Okay, so if you as a designer in Cebu, industrial designer, what advice would you give to yourself? Okay, so good design does not survive without good systems. So you remember that you are not only designing products, you are also designing the conditions under which the design happens. So I leave you with this question: what kind of design professional do you intend to become? Okay, so I end you with I end this lecture rather with this question. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day ahead.